Hello students, this video lecture will cover the elements of mise en scene, which you will apply to the research paper for English 237. So mise en scene, what do we mean? Essentially, it's descended from a French term that began, like many things, and was transformed in the development of film as a medium. It's essentially, if we kind of do a literal idea of it, is what is put into a scene or a frame. So what we can think of when we talk about mise en scene is what is the visual information in front of the camera. Okay? And one of the ways that we have described this in the class is you know it's a mise en scene element if you can only understand it by watching the film. That are reasons like dialogue and or orchestral scores are not entirely mise en scene elements because you can listen or read those without having to watch the film. Mise en scene applies to things that you can see. As a definition of film, the mise en scene is some of the ways that directors and cinematographers and the many people who work on a movie create essential information and present it to the audience. So, the 5 elements of mise en scene, all right? So, when you write your research paper, you will select 2 of these to analyze in the film Moonlight. So let's look at the 5 elements of mise en scene. We have settings and props, costume, hair, and makeup, facial expressions and body language, lighting and color, and the positions of characters and objects in a frame. As we've talked about with mise en scene, one of the ways that it works to create the magic of cinema, we might say, is that all 5 of these elements work together to present to you the information you see in the film. So what I'm asking you to do is to pay special attention to scenes in the movie, to take apart, to deconstruct how directors will put all of these together in a coherent whole. So your job is to take apart and analyze 2 of these sections and how Barry Jenkins used them in the film Moonlight. So let's start with settings and props. Setting and locations play an important part in filmmaking and are not just the backgrounds. What we mean by settings is the area in which a film takes place, the distant future, the city of Miami, the city of Atlanta, so forth. And then locations are the individual spaces in the setting. So Little's apartment is a location. The beach in Miami in Florida is a location. Right? The restaurant where Black and Kevin meet as adults is a location. Sets, the background and backdrop on which films are recorded, are either built from scratch or a great deal of time is spent finding a setting which already exists and then adding flourishes to it. Right? So we have 2 things. You can either build a set completely from scratch and film a movie in it, or you can find an area or a location and then add your own flourishes as a director and set designer to create the background and the world in which your characters inhabit. Settings can manipulate an audience by building certain expectations and then taking a different turn. Right? So you can think of the ways in which the settings and locations of a film may set you up for one thing, but then lead you into another. One of the things that we could think of is the dining, the diner where Kevin and Black meet. What is it about a diner? What is it about a restaurant? How will that set up your expectations for these 2 characters finally meeting? So we can think of a more general example. Think of setting and props in terms of 3 types of genre movies: a science fiction film, a romantic comedy, and a horror film. What type of setting and props do you expect to find in each one of these genres? Take a moment, pause the video, and give it a think. So, from this example, from the movie Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, we have almost a classic sci-fi setting. We are on the bridge of a starship. or in this case, it was a simulation of a starship, if you've seen the movie. But we're in a starship. We have everybody wearing vaguely sci-fi uniforms. We have sci-fi looking doors. We have panels to fly it. Everything is set up to kind of look like the futuristic bridge of a spaceship. This doesn't look like a plane or a boat as we would find them in real life. 2, a romantic comedy. You might set the romantic comedy in a place like Central Park, where you can have a lovely stroll where two people fall in love and make witty romantic gestures to each other in a gorgeous background. So you would want to set it in Central Park as opposed to the setting of a starship. Finally, a horror movie. All right. If you look at the way this set is constructed, in the horror movie from Freddy, all right, we have the walls all covered with blood. All right, it's in a doctor's office, which can be inherently scary because there's all sorts of terrible, scary things in doctors' offices. And the whole setting and props that are used, including the vials of blood and all of that, are there to make for a scary horror movie experience. Next up, costume, hair, and makeup. Right? The way a character is costumed, the way their hair is done, and the way their makeup is done act as an instant indicator to us of that character's personality, what their status is in society, and the job they have. Costuming can tell us immediately at what time period a film is set, what type of film it is, what culture we are looking at. And then certain costumes can signify certain individuals. All right? As you watch the film Moonlight, for example, look to see how Black has tried to pattern himself by the way he costumes himself to the way that Juan did in the beginning of the film. Next up are facial expressions and body language choices. Facial expressions provide a clear indicator of how someone is feeling. If someone is smiling broadly, we assume they are happy. Body languages can also convey how a character feels towards another character. All of these are ways that a director and an actor can work together to give you visual information about the scene. In the second section of Moonlight, we've talked about how the teenagers in that movie act in a certain way and presented are certain elements to seem closed off, or open, or braggadocio, or violent in terms of the bully. Like, think of the way the bully holds his body language. So here are some framing and body language images that are quite famous that you might know, all right, in terms of a romantic kiss between a superhero and his damsel in distress, an angry look from a killer who is on the run, or, in my personal favorite, this example from the film Whiplash. All right, the way this shot is composed, all right, we see a lot of mise-en-scene elements working with body language and facial expressions. The angry, aggressive teacher, the student who is on the verge of breaking and crying, right? So much so that even if we compare costuming in this too, the fact that the teacher in Whiplash is wearing a black shirt to blend into a black background only highlights his head and his aggressive, angry form of instruction. Next, our positioning of characters and objects in a frame. Please watch our other video on cinematography where we talk about depth of field and focusing. This really impacts this. What is in focus and what can you see? All right? By positioning things close to a camera or far away, the director can give you a sense of importance. By having things in focus or out of focus, the director and cinematographer can help you visualize and understand what is clear to see and clear to interpret and what is murky and hazy. Also note how characters are positioned within a frame. If a character takes up the majority of the frame, they are taking up the space, the visual space in the frame. That might mean that they're as important. They're what you're supposed to focus on. Whereas characters in the distance are things that you might miss on first viewing and are done so on purpose. So if we see the sort of visual positioning here, in this romantic comedy, we see that these two lovers are obviously not getting along. They're visually placed distant from each other, with the center white space being the main thing that you focus on. Also note how they have that break in the couch cushion to symbolize that these two are having a broken position. Their relationship is fracturing. In this scene from Sin City, all right, we have, if you've seen this movie, Bruce Willis's character here, all right, is sort of a vigilante, and the character in the background, who is this exotic dancer who floats through various parts of the film, kind of always acts as a sort of muse or symbol of conscience for many of the characters. And so she is over the shoulder of our main character who is in focus. Next, we have the scene from Men in Black with the guns and the two characters side by side next to each other with their poses almost equidistant. Unlike the first two, where we saw two people splitting apart, everything that's presented to you with the positioning of these characters shows that these guys are a team, all right? That these guys are partners, and they're looking cool, and they're ready to do stuff, and they're together. They are not split or separate or on different wavelengths. They're positioned as equals and as partners. Another aspect of mise en scene is color. All right, color is tied heavily to things like color theory. One of the ones that I mentioned is it's a very famous story that the visiting locker room for the Iowa football team is painted all pink because a coach at the time thought that by painting things pink, he would reduce the aggression of his characters. So too do filmmakers use color to give you certain feelings and tones in terms of a film. Moonlight, as we've talked about, uses color to a dramatic effect to create elements of mood or tension. Pay special attention to how colors work within each section of Moonlight, as each stage in the film is given its own unique color tone, not necessarily one color, but a tone of colors to give you, the audience member, a feeling of what the characters are going through at that particular stage of the film. So if we look at mise en scene all put together, we can see this scene from American Beauty. We have a lot working on it in terms of how the characters are positioned. We see that by separating them with all of this space, this is a family that is not together. They are distant. The formal setting and the formal seating position of the characters tell us that it's only the formality of the family keeping them together. There's no warmth or love or genuine affection. We see the lighting contrasting heavily on the central character, the daughter's face, as the most important person, while her parents are put more in shadow, saying that, again, she's not focusing or doesn't have maybe a stronger connection on her parents. And then we see that everything in the house has a cold, antiseptic, and designed feel. Everything seems to be in its proper place, but it's all in its proper place without any sense of warmth or personal touches. There are no family photos on the wall. There's no knickknacks that refer to the characters. A watch isn't placed on the dresser. Somebody's a coat isn't on the back of the chair. It's a very cold and rigid vision of the family, showing you that this is a family that is not filled with warmth and love. Which brings us to our last effect, lighting. All right. Lighting and color kind of work hand to hand because lighting, soft, warm lighting, oftentimes goes hand in hand with colors that make it soft. All right. One of the things to note with lighting is how lighting can be used to highlight important characters or objects within a frame. How by lighting a character in a specific way, they can look mysterious or scary. And how lighting can reflect the emotional states of the characters. If you watch our video lecture on cinematography, we talk again about various points of lighting. So this section is more or less a review section. As we've talked about, low-key lighting is created by only using the lighting key, the main brightest color, and black lights to produce sharp contrasts of dark and light. This is done to make things spooky or mysterious or harsh. It creates deep, distinct shadows and silhouettes. One of the things that you will notice in Moonlight, try and find an example of low-key lighting, where it is a strong contrast between dark and light. It's very tricky. It's not something that they used a lot. You see this a lot in horror films, or noir films, or detective films. Next, you can see high-key lighting. That is where filler lights are used. Lighting is more natural and realistic to our eyes. It produces bright, sunny lit, even lighting. This example is romantic comedies, comedies in general, or even action movies. So here's an example if we go back to that scene where the different elements of lighting are, with key lights being the center, the backlights producing lights in the background, and then the filler lights rounding out the elements of lighting. Once again, as we said, make sure you refer back to our video lecture on cinematography where we discuss lighting with a little bit more in-depth manner. So finally, as you move forward with the research project, you should select 2 of these elements to analyze in the film Moonlight. These should be mentioned in sections 2 and 3 of your research project paper. Every element that I described here can be found discussed in more detail in Barsum's book, Looking at Movies, that you can see on Blackboard. As you go, think about how 2 of these elements help to create a theme about the film Moonlight. And don't forget to watch the video lecture on the research projects and cinematography for more information to help you write the assignment. Good luck, and I will see you again in the next video lecture.